Hello and welcome back to Dueling Grounds. Yesterday I played my first Duel Commander League on Magic the Gathering Online and I decided to pilot Spiderman 2099, otherwise known as Uharis the Storm Spinner, because getting the proper licenses is apparently very difficult when you're a multi-million-dollar company. I played against this deck at Relic Fest and was really impressed with how it performed, so I did some practice games off camera and got ready to record my first league. Game 1 went terribly, partly because I lost and partly because I accidentally screen recorded the wrong tab. So round 1 was a disappointment. I misplayed, was struggling to understand the client, and was gutted to have lost the footage. I took a break, figured out how to screen record properly, and got ready for round 2. So round 2, I'm on the play against Prosh. I'm not very familiar with the deck. I know it's a combo deck of some sort. My opening 7 is terrible. 1 land, no way to redraw, no consideration of keeping this hand, easy mulligan. The 6, I'm not very happy with either. I keep it, bottom the Sinister Concierge, mainly because I'm not very familiar with the card, I haven't played it before. So I lead on a Misty Rainforest and pass for turn. My opponent sees my Misty Rainforest and raises me a Misty Rainforest, which they sacrifice to grab a Bayou and cast Allow or Else. I accidentally F6 through my opponent's turn. I really should be sacrificing the Misty Rainforest for a Thundering Falls here, but instead I accidentally move to my next turn. I draw into a Tidebinder, which doesn't excite me here, but it could be relevant later in the game. I decide to crack my Misty now to grab a Volcanic Island. I play a Den of the Bugbear for turn and tap them both to cast a Cori Steelcutter. I've got no way to trigger it this turn, but my hand isn't very reactive, so I really have to be getting something onto the board. My opponent plays a mountain and enchants it with a fertile ground. I then tap the enchanted mountain to cast a Wall of Roots. They put a counter onto the Wall of Roots, which means they can add a green so they can cast the Malt Tender. I remind myself of what Prosh actually does before untapping and drawing a Fear of Missing Out. I play the Bloodstained Mire and I just pass here. I don't want to run out of FOMO as I want to save it for double spell with Cori, and I'm holding up a Tidebinder or a Stern Scalding and a Surveil. My opponent then untaps before immediately tapping out to cast a Prosh. I decide to crack my Bloodstained Mire here and shock myself with a Steam Vents in order to fire off for Tidebinder, as I respect what a Horde of Kobolds can do. Tidebinder stifles the cast trigger and my opponent passes back to me. I tank for a bit here before deciding that the best line for me is to cast my commander and Flame Slash Prosh before combat. This triggers the Cori Steelcutter and makes me a monk token. I declare an attack with both the Tidebinder and the monk. My opponent doesn't declare any blockers, takes 5 damage. I move to the end step and Spiderman slash Uharis triggers as he saw himself be cast from his own other than my hand and deals 2 damage, finishing off Prosh, which my opponent chooses to put into the graveyard. My opponent then untaps and activates the Malt Tender, exiling Prosh from the graveyard for a mana and getting it back into command zone, and taps out for a Chaos Defiler. Chaos Defiler enters and randomly destroys my Cori Steelcutter. My opponent then casts the Birds of Paradise before passing back to me. I'm feeling nervous at this point. I really need to play a land this turn or I feel like I'm going to fall behind. Luckily I draw into the land. Again, I tank for a bit trying to figure out what I should do. I decide to swing with everything. I want to wipe my opponent's board here. They've missed land drops, so I need to deal with their mana dogs, but I can't leave a Chaos Defiler around, so I need them to block with it so that it can be finished off with the Fiery Confluence. Because of how my opponent decides to block, I realise I can cast a Fiery Confluence, dealing 1 damage to each creature and 4 to my opponent. In theory, both my commander and monk survives. In reality, Chaos Defiler randomly takes my commander out with its death trigger. I'm feeling good here as my opponent is behind on mana and I'm left with a creature in play. My opponent plays a Bloodstained Mire and then casts a Sylvan Caryatid. They crack Bloodstained Mire and get a basic Swamp, which they consider tapping, but decide not to. I untap and draw a True Name Nemesis, which feels like it closes the door on this game. I decide to attack with a Monk. My opponent blocks, but I can't trigger Prowess. And post-combat I cast a True Name Nemesis, holding up the Stern Scalding. My opponent plays a Badlands, casts a Goblin Bombardment, and follows it up with a Pattern of Rebirth. At this point I am panicking. I felt like I was about to win, and now I'm thinking of what the Rebirth can get. My first thoughts are Deadpool or Metamorphosis Fanatic. Deadpool to steal True Name's text box, or Metamorphosis Fanatic to bring back Chaos Defiler. I swing into the True Name Nemesis, my opponent doesn't block and goes to 2. Here I recast my commander. In theory, moving to the end step should win me the game, but I'm waiting to see what my opponent can do with the Pattern of Rebirth. They sacrifice the Sylvan Caryatid, putting a Pattern of Rebirth trigger onto the stack, and they concede the game. So I'm on the draw for game 2. I see a 7 that's maybe keepable, but it's just not really doing anything, so I decide to mulligan. I see a 6 that's slow but has some powerful cards in it. I put back the Mistrise Village because I don't think it's very relevant in this matchup, and I have the baubles, so hopefully draw into another land. My opponent leads with a Swamp and then just passes. I draw into another bauble. I have no real reason to hold on to them, so I just use both baubles. The Mishra's Bauble shows me an Overlord on top of my opponent's library, and the Urza's Bauble shows me an Earthcraft in my opponent's hand. The Bauble triggers draw me into a Ponder and a Preordain. My opponent plays a Yavimaya into a Devoted Druid. I play the Pathway and hold up mana to flash in the Malcolm. My opponent taps out for an Overlord, making an Everywhere token, and as planned I flash in the Malcolm, untap and swing for 2. I draw a Sinister Concierge and throw away the Ghostfire Slice. I need to draw a land this turn, so I cast the Ponder as it'll let me see more cards. I put them all on top and draw it into the Arid Mesa. I don't want to crack it until after I've drawn the Harbinger, as I think disrupting my opponent's mana is going to be crucial this game. My opponent plays a Farseek into an Earthcraft. Again I swing with Malcolm, drawing the Brazen Borrower and throwing away the Fable, as I'm about to lose the ability to tap for red. I crack Arid Mesa, really wanting to get a basic mountain, but having to grab a Volcanic Island, so I have 2 blue for the Harbinger. My opponent untaps, does nothing and passes back to me. I untap, draw an Intuition and decide to swing in with the team. Malcolm draws me a Fury, I discard the Intuition. I cast a Ponder, putting the Chivalry on top and drawing into Memory Lapse, so I'm holding up Memory Lapse and the Petty Theft here. My opponent cast a Deathrite Shaman. Normally I wouldn't Memory Lapse Deathrite Shaman at this point in the game, but my opponent passed without doing anything last turn, so it feels more like I'm casting Time Walk here. End step, Overlord's last impending counter is removed. I untap, draw the lands I know about and play it. I bounce the Overlord so I can get in for damage. Malcolm now has 4 chorus counters, so I get to discard and cast a Pyroglyph for free, and my opponent has seen enough. Round 2 went much better than round 1, but before we jump into round 3, I want to take a moment to talk about ManaTraders. After having an absolute blast at Relic Fest, I realised I wanted to take Duel Commander a bit more seriously. Playing just once a week at FNM wasn't going to cut it if I really wanted to level up, so I dusted off MTGO for the first time in years and started looking into rental services. That's when I rediscovered ManaTraders. They offer a bunch of subscription options, but the one that immediately caught my eye was their Commander tier. For just $26 a month, you can rent a full Commander deck worth up to 400 ticks. For someone trying to practice more, test lists and grow in the format, it's incredibly convenient. If you're interested in giving ManaTraders a try, they've generously provided a coupon code for the channel. Use Dueling_Grounds_2025 and you'll get cashback equal to 40% of your subscription cost in your 3rd month. The code will be on screen and in the description. Alright, promo over, let's get into round 3. So it's round 3 and we're on the draw against Amanatu. My 7 looks okay, but for some reason I decided to mulligan it. Our 6 looks interesting. I haven't got to play with Wang Shiton yet, so I decided to keep it. I bottomless turn Scolding as I'm not sure how relevant it's going to be against a control opponent. My opponent leads with a Rafine's Tower, and I follow up with a Mysterized Village. My opponent plays a Gloom Lake Verge into an Edge of Eternity's common that seems insane in his deck. I untap, play Shivan Reef and pass, keeping up Mana Leak and the Bird. My opponent plays a Spellseeker, and I'm not sure if I should counter this or play the Bird. I decide that I like drawing cards, so I flash Wan Shitong. My opponent shoots for a Swords to Plowshare, which will make a lovely target for our Mental Misstep, and the Bird draws us into a Lorien Revealed. I untap and draw Unholy Heat. I swing in with Wan Shitong. Here, instead of committing a pathway, I decide to cycle the Lorien Revealed to grab a Thundering Fools. We Surveil and Urza's Bauble into the graveyard. Our opponent taps out for their commander. I'm wondering why I didn't grab a Volcanic Island off the Lorien Revealed. Then I could have Mana Leaked their commander. So sadly, Amanatu resolves, and they flicker their common to draw 2 more cards. We draw a peak, we play the pathway, and we attempt to cast our commander. We swing Wan Shitong at Amanatu. Our opponent attempts to Swords to Plowshares Wan Shitong, but we say not today and we cast Mental Misstep. Our Bird kills their Planeswalker. End of turn, our commander triggers and we kill the Spellseeker. Our opponent plays a Meticulous Archive and surveils a Ponder into the bin. They then attempt to swipe our board with a Toxic Deluge, but we respond with a Mana Leak. They cast a Personal Tutor, putting Terminus on top of their library, growing our Bird and drawing us a card. I untap, swing with the team, and pass, holding up interaction for the Terminus that we know about. My opponent Miracle draws the Terminus. I activate Mysterized Village here and get confused, and I try to remand the triggered ability of Terminus. Eventually I realise what's going on, I untap my lands. My opponent then casts a Terminus and I remand it. My opponent casts a Tainted Pact in response. They exile a lot of cards here, before eventually finding a reprieve and reprieving our remand. They drop a Flooded Strand and they pass back to us. Draw and play an island, have a peek at our opponent's hand. We realise here that they have no counterspells or removal and decide the coast is clear to redeploy our commander. They crack Flooded Strand, cast a Brainstorm. End step, we put them into bolt range. They untap and play a Grimbauble, which enters and gives our commander -2/-2. Then they recast Aminatu, flicker the bauble, and finish off Spiderman. I untap, play Fear of Missing Out, discarding the Party Thrasher and drawing into a Memory Lapse. Then send them Fear of Missing Out on a Wild Ride, but our opponent concedes before we can swing in for lethal. So it's game 2, and my opening 7 has good mana, Cloud of Dominus, and a Spell Snare, so I think this is a snap keep. Most good counterspells in the format are 2 mana, so this hand feels like it lines up perfectly into a turn 4 commander, putting a Cloud onto it with a Spell Snare backup. My opponent leads on a Verdant Catacombs, which they crack in the main phase because they respect Stifle. I play a Thundering Falls, and I see a land on top of my library. I want to be greedy and put it to the graveyard, but a turn 4 is looking so good that I don't really want to risk it. My opponent plays a Command Tower, and again they have this deck's Mythic Common. I don't have anything to do here, so I just land and pass to our opponent. My opponent doesn't want to run out their commander into open mana, so they go land, pass back. I draw Flame of Venor, play a land, and pass back to my opponent. Again, my opponent plays a land and passes, but in their end step, I cast a Flame of Venor. I'm torn between destroying their card draw engine and drawing cards myself, but my decision is ultimately meaningless as my opponent reprieves the spell anyway. I play and then crack an Arid Mesa, grabbing a Volcanic Island. I cast my commander, attempt to enchant it with a Clout of the Dominus, and instead of having a 2-mana counterspell, my opponent has a 1-mana removal spell that I have no answers for. My opponent casts their commander, flickers their relic to draw some cards, and passes back to us. I draw and play Command Tower, and then recast my commander. They cast Nowhere to Run, but Spell Snare ensures my commander does have somewhere to run, and end of turn my commander triggers and takes their commander off the field. They play Teferi, Hero of Dominaria. I would happily let my commander go into our library, but MTGO decides not to give me a choice, and he goes into the command zone. I draw a Malcolm, and as most of my hand works at instant speed, I pass back to my opponent. They activate Teferi and cast a Rest in Peace, which I think combos with the Helm of Obedience I saw last game, but I'm not certain. They cast a Wishlore Talisman here, and after realising how it works with Aminatu, I decide that I want to build an Aminatu deck. In my opponent's end step, I flash in my Malcolm and again cast Flame of Venor, ignoring the problematic artifacts on my opponent's side of the board, and deciding I just need more cards. They attempt to mana leak my Flame of Venor, but I think the mana leak should actually target my Redirect Lightning. My Flame of Venor gets to resolve, but draws me into nothing good. I tank for a while, trying to figure out how I recover from being so far behind. I want to kill Teferi, but Malcolm has to hit face to loot. Malcolm draws me into a remand, and I throw away the Thundering Eruption. I stock up, looking for a miracle, and find Force of Negation and Wash Away to try and disrupt my opponent as much as possible. I cast the Mishra's Bauble, and see a Drowned Catacombs on top of my opponent's library. They Tainted Pact in end step and exile until they find a Swords to Plowshares. They upstick Teferi and cast a Helm of Obedience. I think this combos with Rest in Peace, so I have to answer it. I decided to remand as they don't have the mana to recast it, but they do have the mana to cast Spell Snare, and we're blown out when we have Force to cast Force of Negation, pitching the Wash Away. They sack their relic to stun Malcolm. We draw a Brainstorm, filter some mana for an Opulent Palace so we can recast our commander with free power, allowing his end step trigger to kill Teferi. Our opponent casts for Swords to Plowshares. I forgot they grabbed a Tainted Pact, and I concede as I'm very behind on the clock. Game 3, I'm on the play, and I keep a 7 that isn't super exciting, but it's not really a hand that I think I should mulligan. I lead on a Prismatic Vista, which I immediately crack for an island, so that I can cast Preordain. I put the Reckless Charge on top and the Wash Away on the bottom. My opponent plays a Polluted Delta and immediately cracks it for a Swamp, again respecting Stifle. I draw and then cast a Cataxian Probe targeting my opponent, which is a card I always love to cast, but especially when I'm playing against control. The hand seems fine, but it doesn't really worry me that much. My opponent doesn't have an answer currently for my Commander plus Reckless Charge. I play the Swarmyard so that I can keep up Remand or cycle Lorien Revealed if I need to. My opponent cycles away their Lorien Revealed in end step and grabs a Tundra. They play a Seachrome Coast and they ponder. I decide to remand it because, as Adam says, I would remand anything here. I play my third land, past my opponent, starting to get worried about how much time I have left this game. My opponent ponders again, and this time I have to let it go. End step, I cycle my Lorien Revealed to get a Volcanic Island, and I stomp my opponent's face. They force spike the stomp, which I'm happy to see, as it looks like their shields are down for my next turn. I cast my Commander, and then target it with Reckless Charge. I attack my opponent for 10 damage. Move to the end step and deal them 5 more damage. A Pinnacle Starcage from my opponent puts my Commander back into the command zone. I untap, draw a land, and recast my Commander. Chain Lightning, targeting my opponent's face. And in the end step, my Commander trigger finishes my opponent off. So I'm happy with how round 3 went. We are 2-1 so far into the league, which for my first league MTGO I'm pretty happy with, and I'm ready to go into round 4. Round 4 is a mirror match, and I'm reminded of the popular internet meme. Our opponent wins a die roll, so I've basically lost already, and I keep an isolating 7, as with the sink and the bolt I feel like I have 2 answers to my opponent's Commander. They lead with a tapped Steam Vents, I follow up with Wooded Foothills and pass. Polluted Delta from my opponent, and I crack the Wooded Foothills in their end step to grab a Thundering Falls. I keep the Preordain on top, untap and cast a Party Thrasher. My opponent cracks the Polluted Delta, getting an island, and decides to mana leak our Party Thrasher. They play a Sulphur Falls and pass. We draw into a Magus of the Moon, which might have been a good draw if it wasn't for the basic island on my opponent's side of the field. They play a Volcanic Island and then cast their Commander. I crack the Feathered Strand so that I can sink into Stupor their Commander, which they proceed to recast and deal us 2 damage in the end step. I cast and then crack an Urza's Bauble, seeing a basic mountain in their hand. I try to bolt their Commander here, but they have a mental misstep. I follow up by casting my Commander, and in the end step, dealing them 2 damage. They sink into Stupor our Commander, which we have no way of stopping. The Commander goes on a wild ride. Hits us for 10. And then second main phase, they harmonise the wild ride, so that in the end step the Commander trigger will kill us, so we go to game 2. Game 2, and I'm on the play, keeping a 7 that I'm pretty happy with. It has a bolt to try and stop their Commander, and a bird to hopefully draw me some cards. I lead with a Scalding Tarn, which I immediately crack for a Thundering Falls, which shows me a Dragon's Rage Channeler on top of my library, which I decide to leave there. My opponent follows up with an Arid Mesa, but I'm happy to see they don't crack it during their turn. I play an island and try to pass, but they crack the Arid Mesa in main step, so I flash in Wan Shitong. My opponent grabs the Thundering Falls, which they use to surveil away a Scalding Tarn, and our bird draws us into an Urza's Bauble. My opponent plays an island and passes the turn. I play Dragon's Rage Channeler, then cast an Urza's Bauble. Dragon's Rage Channeler triggers and I leave the Expressive Iteration on top of my library. I attack with Wan Shitong, my opponent takes 2 damage. I then play Arid Mesa and cast a Ponder, again surveilling the Expressive Iteration on top of my library. I crack the Bauble, seeing a Pyrokinesis in my opponent's hand. They cast Pyrokinesis, and I tank for a bit, trying to decide if I want to force negation here, but instead crack the Arid Mesa for a Volcanic Island, as I realise that I can bolt my opponent's face, meaning Delirium will keep my Dragon's Fish Channeler alive. Surveil trigger, and I keep a Pyroglyph on top of my library. My opponent plays another island and passes. I cast an Expressive Iteration, surveilling Lorien Revealed into the bin. With the Expressive Iteration, I put a Stern Scolding into hand and then Otawara into exile, which I proceed to play for the turn. I move to combat and hit my opponent for 3 before passing the turn. My opponent plays another land, but again just passes the turn here. I untap, attack with the Dragon's Rage Channeler, putting my opponent to 8. Second main phase, I cast my commander, and my opponent kicks a Consult the Star Charts in response, but doesn't find anything. End step, my commander puts them to 6. They untap, play Bloodstained Mire and crack it, making the Pyroglyph in my hands ETB lethal here. They cast their commander, and I respond with a Stern Scolding. I see a true name, and I leave it on top of my library. My opponent steps out for an Abhorrent Oculus, a card that's normally very good, but here my opponent is far too behind. I untap, they Manifest Dread, but I cast the Pyroglyph and they concede with it on the stack. Game 3 goes terribly. We have to mulligan to 5, and I'm just going to skip to the end of this game. Our opponent casts their commander. I flash in a Snapcaster Mage targeting Memory Lapse, but accidentally hit Yield All and our opponent's commander resolves without us having a chance to Memory Lapse it. I concede in shame. So we're 2-2 at the end of round 4, and I'm feeling okay at this point. We need to go 3-2 if we want to get our entry price back, so we've got one last chance. All I need to do is not get paired against a really good player. So round 5, and I see I've been paired against Parole. For anyone who isn't familiar, Parole is a very good French dual commander player, and to make matters worse, he's on the play. But my 7 looks good, so I feel like I have a reasonable chance this game. My opponent leads with an Otawara and passes. I play a Scalding Tarn, and I don't play the Bataxian Probe as I'm saving it to trigger Corey Steelcutter. Land from my opponent, and I crack my Scalding Tarn at end step to grab Thundering Falls. I see a mountain, and I leave it on top. I play the mountain for turn and cast a Corey Steelcutter. It gets mana leaks, but I have no reason to hold on to the Bataxian Probe anymore, so I try to look at my opponent's hand, but he has a mental misstep. My opponent casts a Quicken and passes without playing a land. I play a Polluted Delta and pass for turn. My opponent again passes without playing a land. I crack my Polluted Delta in end step to grab a tapped Steam Vents. I untap, play my 4th land and cast my commander. I try to send my commander on a wild ride, but he gets dismembered instead. My opponent finally draws to their 3rd land, but it enters tapped. I untap and play an island. I cast my commander for the 2nd time this game and try to cast a Reckless Charge. My opponent flashes in a Snapcaster Mage and flashes back the Mental Misstep, countering my Reckless Charge. I move to my end step and my commander triggers, killing the Snapcaster Mage. My opponent untaps and casts a Toxic Deluge for X equals 3. I play another land and cast my commander for the 3rd time this game. End step, my commander triggers and I put my opponent down to 9. My opponent plays a tapped Watery Grave and then casts a Detective's Phoenix. I play a land and flashback Reckless Charge targeting my commander. I cast a Fiery Confluence with the modes deal 2 to each creature and 2 to my opponent, and my opponent concedes before combat. So it's game 2, and I have a look at my first hand and decide I have to mulligan it, but I'm very happy with the 6 that I get. I'm not really sure what I should bottom, but settled on the Unholy Heat. Maybe it should have been the Harbinger. My opponent leads on a Misty Rainforest. I play a Scalding Tarn and for some reason decide to crack it here for a Volcanic Island, although I'm unlikely to need an untapped land this turn. End step, my opponent cracks their Misty Rainforest and gets an Undercity Sewers, surveilling a card to the top. They untap and cast a Preordain before playing an Underground Sea. I play a River Pyre Verge and pass the turn. My opponent pays a mana for a Cataxian Probe, has a look at our hand and then casts a Prismatic Vista. I flash in the bird, and they crack a Vista in response, so that we won't draw a card off the bird. I untap, move to combat, and hit my opponent for 1. Second main phase, I play an island into a Sinister Concierge, holding up the wash away that my opponent knows about. My opponent plays a land, taps some lands, and then changes their mind. I untap, swing for 3, and my opponent takes it. Post-combat, I play a mountain and cast a Harbinger of the Sea. My opponent casts a Brain Surge in response, before letting my Harbinger resolve, but then when I move to my end step, my opponent bolts the Harbinger. My opponent casts a Toxic Deluge for X is 1, and my Sinister Concierge gets exiled with 3 time counters on it. I untap and play a land and cast my commander, who my opponent tries to Spell Snare. I tap out to cast a Cleaved Washaway, which my opponent responds to with a Mental Misstep. I choose to put my commander into the graveyard here, hoping to exile it with an Abhorrent Oculus later in the game. My opponent casts Firelord Azusa and then passes back to me. I untap and draw a Malcolm, I'm already regretting putting my commander into the graveyard here, and I just pass back to my opponent. My opponent attacks with Azula. I flash in Malcolm and declare it as a blocker, so I can get my 6th card in the graveyard for my Oculus. My opponent casts a Consider and copies it with the Azula. After combat, my opponent casts an Inquisition of Kozilek and makes me discard my Oculus, and I regret my decisions even harder. In my upkeep, my Concierge comes off suspend, but gets a stern scolding. I draw into a peek, look at my opponent's hand, and decide to go to game 3. So it's the final game of the league and I'm on the play. I'm indecisive at my opening hand, but decide to keep it. I lead with Misty Rainforest and crack it for a Thundering Falls. I see a mountain on top and decide to leave it there. My opponent plays a Verdant Catacombs and cracks it for an Underground Sea. They cast a Ponder that I consider mental misstepping, but decide to let it resolve. I untap and play the Mountain before passing back to my opponent. My opponent shocks an Esteem Vent and casts a Psychic Frog. In the end step, I flash in my Malcolm, untap and attack with it. I hit my opponent for 2 and draw a Force of Negation. I'm uncertain of what to discard to Malcolm, but settle for the Sinister Concierge. I play the Shepherd Reef and pass with several instant speed spells in hand. My opponent plays a land and gets in with the Frog, drawing a card. In their end step, I flash in the Vendilion Peak and take a look at their hand. I decide to bottom the Force of Negation here. I untap, swing with both my flyers, and my opponent attempts to Burst Lightning my Malcolm. I respond by redirecting the Burst Lightning to the Psychic Frog. My opponent discards a card to save the Frog. I draw into a Ghostfire Slice and tank for a bit, deciding what to discard here. I settle on the Ghostfire Slice in the end, but I'm still not sure if it's the correct decision. Post-combat, I cast my Commander, which my opponent tries to Spell Snare, but I respond with my Mental Misstep. My opponent casts a Mental Note in response, but my Spell Snare ends up resolving, and then so does my Commander. End step, I target Psychic Frog with my Commander, and my opponent throws away 2 more cards to save it. My opponent untaps and casts a Demonic Tutor, then exiles 3 cards to jump their Frog, swings in, and before damage they discard 2 more cards to put their Frog's power up to 6. I go to 4, and post-combat my opponent casts a Ghostfire Slice targeting my face. I pitch the Brazen Borrower to cast a Force of Negation. My opponent has no blockers or cards in hand, so I swing with the Malcolm and my Commander, putting my opponent to 4. My opponent taps out for their Commander, I cast a Memory Lapse, and my opponent concedes. So finish with a 3-2 performance, which I'm really happy with considering this is my first league. The deck is incredibly powerful. This commander feels really, really strong. This is a different type of video for the channel, so if you have any feedback, good or bad, please let us know in the comments down below. Have a great rest of your day, and see you again next time.